All right, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Cliff Hastings. This is Kelvin Mischo, and our third co-author is Michael Morrison, who's not here today. We're going to give you a talk on writing the book, the Hands-On Start to Mathematica book, and some of the thought processes that went into that, and some of the lessons that we learned through that process as well. So about the talk, the basic structure, a little bit about us, some of the goals we meant to accomplish, the evolution to creating the book. We'll talk about a little bit on the process of writing and editing that we did. Kelvin will then talk about the book itself, and then we'll talk about the marketing and sales process as well as the lessons that we learned through that process. So a bit about us. I went to a small liberal arts college. My background was math. I used a bunch of tools in college, but never learned any of them. We had 6 different softwares for 6 different classes, and it wasn't a very cohesive experience for me, but I also had no programming experience either. Michael and Kelvin, Michael got his bachelor's and master's in computer science. Kelvin, his background was psychology and engineering. Both of them were very strong programmers, had lots of programming experience, lots of background in different languages and tool sets. At Wolfram, Kelvin and I became very fast friends. We've been here 17 and 18 years, respectively. Michael was here for 10 years and went on to work at a university. When I started at Wolfram, I started with the Mathmobile. So people would come see me at a university or company. There would be doors that dropped down to make ramps. They would come in and I would show them Mathematica. Through that process, there was an inundation of different learning styles and people who needed visual help. They needed audio help. There was a lot of different things. So I knew I needed to learn how to speak about Mathematica without overwhelming them, but I also couldn't dumb down Mathematica either. Michael, when he was at Wolfram, he started in tech support. So he became very comfortable with technical questions about Mathematica and where our users fell short, either in very technical conversations or very simplistic FAQ type questions. And then Kelvin actually started in customer service, so I had lots of conversations with people about passwords and activations and site license portal usage. So we all came from very different backgrounds, both in our education and also here at Wolfram. And then we culminated that together by working in the sales department for several years together. So when working in sales together, we would often meet and talk about some of our Wolfram goals. So one of our primary things we set out to work on together was how to get a wider spread usage of Mathematica. And there were 3 steps we thought and identified to make that happen. Number 1, we needed to give people more repeatable statements about Mathematica. We would be at a conference, we'd hear somebody say, "Hey, Bob, what is Mathematica?" And everybody's answer was very different. It stumbled, it seemed complex. So we wanted to give people repeatable answers to that to help them educate others about why they loved Mathematica. Number 2, we needed to get our current users out of thinking of Mathematica only for a very specific couple of tasks: symbolics, graphics, calculus, the 3 things we hear about a lot. We needed to get people out of just those thoughts of their use of Mathematica. And then finally, we have millions and millions of people who love Mathematica, love our brand, really appreciate what it is the tool does, but not enough of them actually use it on a day-to-day basis. We need to get people to go from appreciating to actually using. So we came up with 3 solutions to these problems. One, on the repeatable statement, we created what was called the Tech Talk. And all of our salespeople learned how to give a great talk on Mathematica to universities, to companies, to government labs, to create that repeatable statement. Lots and lots of people saw the big picture value. They had quotes like, "This completely erases my long-standing belief that Mathematica is too difficult for our students." That was great. We were getting over that repeatability hurdle. But we didn't fix that usage issue yet. So number 2, then we worked on a set of videos called the Hands-On Start series. This was a video set to help students and faculty start using Mathematica right away in courses. So we said, if you'll use it in courses, or commercial people, if you'll use it in projects, you don't have to spend the time learning Mathematica or pay for it. We'll teach it for you in this video series. That was great. Got a lot of great feedback, got several 100,000 views of those videos. But the issue was that although people loved them, we learned that really the video series was a watch it once and done type medium. Students didn't want to go back and rewatch the videos over and over again. So they saw it, they tried it, but then they wanted something, a resource to go back and stay on learning Mathematica. So that led us to the book and writing the book. So the feedback we got on the videos a lot was they were so helpful because of the approachability of the video and how non-difficult it made Mathematica feel. And it really became approachable to lots of students at junior colleges and high schools, and not just the chemical engineering student at MIT type kid. So that was what we wanted to really think about in writing the book, how to make it useful but also very approachable in the process. So there were several things that Michael, Kelvin, and I worked on quite a bit to create the book. One was creating a unified chapter structure. We wanted it to feel like it had a lot of depth in explanation of the Wolfram language and Mathematica, but it also needed to stay very approachable as well. So the tone of the book changed many, many times. Up here I have 3 full drafts of how it changed over time, where Kelvin and Michael are very good programmers and very structural in their thinking. Their tone had a little bit more of a textbook feel to it, where my tone is a little bit more conversational. So we talked a lot about how to envelop something that had both. So a lot of text explanations, but then also we have a section of notes and suggestions throughout the book that feels much more conversational and says, okay, Wolfram language, you should do this, this, and this, and this, but psst, this is a much easier way to do it this way instead. Then there's lots of examples throughout the book. Into each chapter, there are assessment questions to ensure you've understood the chapter, so faculty can then require it as part of a course, have students take the quizzes, do those, and turn those in as assignments if they so choose. We also worked a lot on agreement on who the audience for the book is. The audience for Mathematica is everyone, but you can't write a book for everyone without the risk of making it, again, too dumbed down or too high level for a big audience. So we really focused in on the first-time user of Mathematica, or those who have used Mathematica in the past are now returning it back to it for the first time in quite a while. We wanted it to be anybody at any level, however, whether it be verticalized, meaning student or commercial or teacher. So we spent a lot of time making sure each chapter and each part of the text was written for a student at MIT or Parkland College or high school or the commercial person using a project for the first time. So we paid very special attention to that. And for my background of being very good in mathematics, but not having a programming background, it was very important to me that this book felt very approachable to students who are in the maths or life sciences or business or junior colleges who have not had a strong programming background. That was very, very important to me, and I think is a big part of this book as well. We talked a lot about division of labor and making sure our strengths were utilized in writing the book as well. Again, Michael and Kelvin really wrote a lot of the book. I didn't have much of the the actual authorship of the book. My strengths were in creating the story from start to finish, making sure it appeased many different types of audiences and really focused on the new user of Mathematica, writing the problem sets, and then my strength is just being bossy. So Kelvin and Michael weren't working on things fast enough. I would just be bossy and make them get to things and make sure we're on a timeline. We did a lot of sharing of documents, either via Dropbox or paper, email. We had midnight chats, whatever. So since the 3 of us all worked at Wolfram, it was very important we didn't want to spend work time on the book. We did this mostly evenings and weekends for quite a while in writing the book. The last step, which is important to you then, is working with Wolfram Media. So there were a couple of steps to that in being an author. We put together a basic proposal. We talked to Stephen and Andre about it. They thought it was a great idea, and that's where Wolfram Media got resurfaced again. I acted as the primary legal contact, so I negotiated the contract with Wolfram Media. I set up an LLC on our behalf for the book moving forward. Michael acted as the primary production contact. So he worked with the editing group and publications and graphic design. We had a couple of collaborative meetings on things like book cover and a few nuances on just graphic design things, but overall it was a very easy and painless process. Kelvin's going to show the book, talk a little bit about the actual inner workings of the book, and then I'll wrap up and talk a little bit about our sales and marketing approach, what we did to get people to be aware of it and to purchase it, and some of the lessons we learned from it. Go ahead, Kelvin.
Okay, good. So I'm going to show the actual book itself. When I was preparing this talk, it's a very, I'm emotionally invested in all the pages, so my instinct is to have this talk be 30 hours long. But I have 10 minutes, so I'm going to fly in and out of pages and give you comments. So Cliff talked about what we wanted to accomplish with the book that was an extension of the video, an extension of the other things that we wanted to do. When we started writing the book, this became very tangible very quickly, even in just making the outline of the chapters and what we wanted to cover in terms of content. First thing we really wanted to do that was important to us was to grab the reader's interest right away, to make sure that they pay attention, to make sure that they're excited about Mathematica. We also wanted a slow buildup of material. So Cliff mentioned the differences in backgrounds, the programmers, the non-programmers. So this slow buildup helps anyone ramp into using Mathematica successfully. And we wanted to do the full scope of Mathematica. So Cliff mentioned this as well. There are many great books on how to use Mathematica in a certain discipline, in a certain area. Those books exist, and they're very good. So we didn't want to write another book like that. Our focus is specifically on Mathematica and the full scope of the actual software itself. So my first pillar here, grab the reader's interest right away. So we accomplished that with the first two chapters. So the first chapter, called The Very Basics, it encouraged the readers to actively do something right away. So it's minimal explanation. It's having the reader type some things, work long to do something, to have some successful plots and successful 3D plots, to see something really neat, but really to engage them and get them doing something. Then once they're tuned in, Chapter 2 is a sample project in Mathematica. So our two goals were to show what's possible once you're proficient in Mathematica, and then it motivates people to read on and then go through the actual syntax conventions. So I'll show Chapter 2 here. Good. So I'm showing PDFs here. Keep in mind the notebooks look very similar to the PDFs. So we had a custom style sheet that we used for the authoring of the book. We had a custom palette. So things that are in a different font because they're proper Wolfram language functions, or things that are Shift-Enter, we did that all while we authored. That's the beauty of a style sheet. So the post-production and the design, Cliff mentioned that Michael was more involved in that, but it went very quickly. I mean, it looked in Notebook how it looks in print. Very good in both. So Chapter 2, our sample project in Mathematica, we talk about how Mathematica is the perfect software to do a project like this, and then we pose a question. So we say, what part of the world has the highest life expectancy? And we talk about how people might answer this question and the pitfalls of doing this. Maybe you go out to the web and do a search. Maybe you use another software package. But we talk about how Mathematica is great with this. We start very simply. So we start answering this just with one country, life expectancy in the US. Then we get to how to answer this in terms of country data, in terms of Wolfram language. And then as Cliff mentioned right away, this is a, how did you describe it? Sort of comment, yeah. So this right away is one of the big points of these, we call them spiky boxes. So these are our tips and tricks, but throughout the book, we are comparing, contrasting different approaches to do the same thing. Why would you want to use freeform input? Why would you want to use country data? When is one good? When is the other good? What pitfalls are you going to run into? And those are our tips, and they are early and often throughout the book. So by page 6 here, then we get to the actual answer. So we build up the what we're doing. And so then we start to answer this question where we look at the countries in South America and we start to answer who has the largest life expectancy, or the longest life expectancy. So we're only on page 6. Then we can go a little bit farther. And then we can say, well, wouldn't it be interesting to look at this not just as life expectancy, but let's look at something else, like infant mortality fraction. And let's compare the two for all the countries in the world and see if they have a relationship. And then if you're going to compare two things, or if you're going to swap in any sort of differences or variations in data or anything really, manipulate is the way to do that, of course. And so then you can look at life expectancy versus GDP versus literacy fraction versus all these things. So not only did we answer our original question, but then we showed that this is the habit of Mathematica users. You start out with one question, and then 5 other really interesting questions occur to you as you go, and you start to tackle those questions as well. So we wanted to convey that excitement. We wanted to convey what it felt like to be a Mathematica user, so then people go through the rest of the book. I talked about, oops, there we go. So I also talked about a slow buildup of material. So the next several chapters, chapter 3, chapter 5, these are chapters that outline more of the basics of Mathematica. So input and output starts with exactly what you think it would, Shift-Enter. And then it goes to the suggestions bar and the cell insertion input. And then we get into freeform input. There we go. So then in the first chapter, we're compare and contrast. This is Wolfram language. This is freeform input. This is the layer on top of Mathematica and what that does. And then as we go here, so if I skip to page 15, then we're talking about predictive interface and creating this nice template, how that fits in with freeform input. And then, let's see. And if I skip back to page 12, so I think the pros and cons of all this is what you would expect this chapter to be. But all along the way, we've got these nice tips and tricks. So this one is on triple clicking. We find, I mean, this is one example of lots in this book, but we find this is just a really good, simple habit for people to get into. It's a good way to parse what they've typed. It's a good way to figure out where an expression begins and ends. So there are a lot of things that we recommend in the very early chapters that pay dividends down the road. Another very simple thing, let's see what page that's on, 18. So this is something that falls in the should be obvious, but we have been asked this who knows how many times, n times. How do you enter a fraction? How do you make the input look like the output? How do you do that with a palette? How do you do that with a keyboard shortcut? So all these things that people really want to do when they start using Mathematica, it's not just about syntax, it's about the things that people really want to do. So that's the third chapter. Then the fifth chapter gets into fundamentals of Wolfram language. So here we talk about more conventions. And to keep me from showing all 450 pages, I have a little card here to keep me from not showing the entire thing. Okay, so fundamentals, this is more conventions like variable assignment. So we talk about defining variables. However, we talk about it in a tone that is accessible to anyone. So we point out if you have a calculation like this, where you find yourself retyping something like 10 plus 20 minus 15, and you type that over and over and over again, a variable is a great way to avoid repetition. So this is not a computer science explanation. This is a very practical problem-solving explanation for why you would want to do these things in Mathematica. Same thing with units and symbols. So we start to talk about the quantity function, the quantity framework, how to convert those things. But then before that, we talk about, that's a little farther than I thought. Yeah, before that we talk about you might start just using regular symbols for units. And we talk about that's a common way to start, how that can be an easy way to do things, but then the pros and cons, and when you really want to get into freeform input, the Wolfram alpha data, or quantity, and the advantages of each of them. Then the next thing, so data filtering and manipulation. So I'm going to skip way ahead here to chapter 20. But here we're in a chapter where we've already talked about importing data, things like that. I'm going to skip ahead to the part command. So here we're talking about the part command, not with abstract examples, but we actually import some data and talk about immediately where is part going to be useful. So if you've got a data set which is first name, last name, and then some sort of sample score, intuitively you're going to wonder, how do I get just the scores? How do I extract just that information? Or how do I get the first name, last name? How do I grab out that information? So we're setting this up where the reader asks their own questions as they go, and then we tell them the part command is the solution to that. Same with the select function. So page is that on 24? So again, we're importing data. We're talking about, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead to associations. So with select and append to and cases, we're talking about adding data, cleaning up data, filtering data, but practical reasons of why you'd want to do that. We present the select function where the thought process is not to learn this all at once, but to define how you want to select things, and then the two lists of what you want to select. So we've avoided pure functions. We've made decisions like that, where this is a good introduction where we're building up the content bit by bit. Associations also are covered, where we've talked about lists and nested lists, and then we talk about some of the new things like how to take your data set and create an association and what the advantages are once you're working in that association or data set framework. So those are just a few of the things where we're looking at the buildup of material. Then we wanted to focus on the scope. So I'll show the table of contents. And I think this and the last point are related. So the first 9 chapters of the book, let me make that bigger. There we go. So the first 9 chapters of the book, they are meant to be read in order. So they are the prerequisites for the book. So we assume that all the readers have read basic input, output, slideshows, fundamentals of the Wolfram language, these things that are the basics to get started. Then after that, we've written the book where people can skip around. So some people might get the book and jump straight to calculus. I think a lot of people will jump straight to graphics. Some people will jump straight to data or programming. But these do not, they don't build on each other by chapter. They build on the concepts within the chapter. So they start simple within the chapter and build up in complexity. But you can skip ahead and read the data filtering chapter without reading chapters 10 through 19. So we do this buildup of material, but we also have made things broad where different people with different interests, they can jump in and they can learn, but they can learn the things that they're interested in first, rather than reading 23 chapters or 22 chapters just to then get to statistics, which is what they cared about in the first place. So that's the structure of the chapters. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Cliff.
All right, so a few of the things we did to market the book. On the marketing side, we did a bunch of free hands-on start training courses, which was very successful. We ran 6 back-to-school courses. We had 1,800 attendees of 4,600 registrants. A lot were students, and that's who we had marketed this training to. It was a 2-hour training event, which I trained from pieces of the book, and it was very successful. 60% had not used Mathematica prior to this 2-hour course, and 25% had not even installed it before they got this email about the course. So I was very happy to see it was a bunch of students who were learning for the first time and using it for that first course in back to school. From the sales perspective, we've had a lot of success. Amazon sold out twice and is almost sold out again. So that's been pretty nice. And we're working on getting more of an international presence with that on these next few weeks, and how to get it translated and get it to other places in non-English writing, and also on the ebook side as well. One thing we did that I think was pretty smart, we created a unique code for each book. On the back of the book is a code in which when people get it, they can do a couple of things. One, they can request the answer key for the problem sets if they have that unique code. And then they could also take one of these classes, which is normally $50. They can get it for free. And then we get contact information for who buys the book. We don't use it for anything weird. I just like the opportunity to interact with them and say, hey, you bought the book, how's it going? What are your thoughts so far? What can I help you with? And the purchasers seem very happy to interact with the authors on those things. That's been very nice. A few lessons we learned. Collaboration and passion was the definite key. Even hearing Kelvin talk about pure functions, I remember us having a long, drawn-out fight about whether pure functions would be in this book or not. And that's been a fun thing we had. So we had a good experience with those arguments and discussions along the way. We took a lot longer than necessary. Again, we wanted to do it completely outside of work. And we also wanted it to be a good book to market Mathematica as well. So we would constantly say, oh, did you see that new thing coming in version 11 or version 12? Maybe we should wait until that comes. And finally, we just had to say, no, we got to get this book out and get it done. That code I talked about is on the back cover, but it is hidden like Fort Knox. So we have learned not to do that as tricky as it has been. I think the fact that we come from very different backgrounds with Mathematica was really helpful. There were many times Kelvin and Michael would write something, I would read it, and I couldn't understand it. They were so excited about it and loved it, but if I couldn't understand it, neither would half the audience we were trying to attract to the book as well. So I think it worked out really well that we had multiples of us collaborating on the book. And last thing I would say is just make sure if you're interested in writing a book, have a pricing strategy up front. That helped us understand how much more time, how many more pages, should it be color, should it be big, should it have a cool binding to it, should it have a regular binding? There's a lot of questions along the way we hadn't thought about, but that pricing structure helped that a lot.